Understand this before anything else. The life you are longing for is not something you must chase down, beg for, or earn through years of struggle. It already exists. Right now, in this very moment, the version of you who has already received what you desire is alive within a dimension of consciousness that is closer to you than your own breath. Think about this for a moment. You have spent so much of your life looking outward, searching the world for evidence that your dream is possible, when the entire time the fulfillment of that dream has been waiting quietly within the one place you rarely think to look, your own imagination. Not imagination as fantasy, not imagination as escape, imagination as the actual substance of creation, the very workshop of God operating through you. Let that sink into your spirit. Every great teacher who ever touched the hem of truth whispered some version of the same secret. The kingdom of heaven is within you, not somewhere beyond the clouds, not some distant reward you receive after a lifetime of waiting. Within you now, in this present moment, there exists a state of consciousness in which every desire you have ever held has already been fulfilled. The healed body, the reunited relationship, the overflowing bank account, the recognition, the love, the peace you have been aching for. It is not being manufactured somewhere out there in the world of effects. It already exists, complete and finished, in the world of causes, which is consciousness itself. You must realize that the world you see with your physical eyes is not the birthplace of your circumstances. It is only the reflection of them. Consider this: when you look into a mirror and see a frown, you do not reach into the mirror to lift the corners of your lips. You would look ridiculous trying. Instead, you change your face and the mirror simply, faithfully, obediently follows. Your outer life is that mirror. Every relationship, every dollar, every doctor's report, every closed door and every open one is simply the reflection of an assumption you are holding, whether consciously or unconsciously, in the unseen realm within you. This is why so many people struggle for decades, working tirelessly on the reflection, rearranging the furniture in the mirror while never once turning to face the one whose image is actually being cast. Feel this deeply. The reality you want is not ahead of you on some future timeline you must trudge toward through discipline and sacrifice. It exists now in what could be called the eternal present, a dimension where time as you understand it does not behave the way you have been taught. In this timeless state, your desire is already fulfilled, your healing has already happened, your love has already been given and received, your success has already been recognized. What you are being asked to do is not to create this reality from nothing, but to become aware of it, to shift your attention until you are living from it rather than looking toward it. Allow yourself to see this from a new angle. Most people spend their entire lives thinking from their present circumstances. They see a bill they cannot pay, and they think from lack. They see an empty side of the bed, and they think from loneliness. They see a body that has not yet healed, and they think from sickness. And because imagination is the creative power of God moving through every human being, whatever they think from becomes the lens through which their entire experience of life is filtered and eventually solidified into form. Thinking from a state is entirely different than thinking of a state. When you think of something, you hold it at a distance as an object outside yourself that you're wishing for. But when you think from something, you have entered it. You have taken up residence inside it. You are no longer looking at the mansion through the window. You have walked through its front door and sat down at its table. Notice what happens when you shift, even for a single moment, from thinking of your dream to thinking from your dream. There is an instant relaxation in the body, a subtle exhale, a quiet knowing that replaces anxious wanting. This is the difference between prayer that begs and prayer that believes it has already received. Scripture itself tells us this plainly. Whatever things you desire, when you pray, believe that you receive them and you shall have them. Notice the tense of that statement. Not you shall receive them in the future. Believe that you receive them now in this present moment, and the having in form will follow as surely as day follows night. The truth is, you have been given a power so vast, so intimate, so entirely your own, that most of humanity walks past it every single day without ever recognizing its presence. That power is your imagination, not a toy for children, not a mere mental pastime. Imagination is the very operative power of God, individualized as you, breathing life into every scene you dwell upon with feeling. Every invention that has ever come into the physical world first existed as a picture in someone's mind before human hands ever touched it into form. Every building, every symphony, every act of love, every reconciliation, all of it was first imagined before it became visible. You are doing this every single day of your life, whether you are doing it consciously and deliberately, shaping a future you desire, or unconsciously and carelessly, shaping a future you fear. The mechanism never stops. It is always running, always weaving your inner assumptions into the fabric of your outer experience. The only question is whether you are the one directing it, or whether you are letting old wounds, inherited beliefs, and unexamined fears direct it for you. Imagine for a moment what it would mean to finally take the wheel, to stop being a passenger in your own life, reacting to circumstances as though they were handed to you by some random and indifferent universe, and instead to recognize that you, through the disciplined and loving use of your imagination, are the author, the architect, and the origin point of every experience that unfolds before you. This is not arrogance, this is not delusion, this is simply remembering what you temporarily forgot the moment you were taught to believe only in what your five senses could verify. Your senses were never meant to be your master. They were meant to be your servant, reporting back to you the results of what you have already assumed in consciousness, not dictating to you what is possible. Let this settle within you. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You are not a leaf being blown around by the winds of fate, hoping to land somewhere soft. You are, whether you have realized it yet or not, a creative being made in the image and likeness of the very source that spoke worlds into existence with a word. And that word was not spoken with the lips. It was spoken in consciousness, in imagination, in the deep inner conviction that what was being declared already was so. When it is written that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, understand this: you carry that same creative word within you every time you assume a state and give it your feeling, your attention, your belief. You are not separate from that creative power. You are its living expression, walking around in a body, forgetting your own divinity, and slowly, gently being called back home to remember it. Think about this for a moment. If the reality you want already exists, then the real work is not manifestation in the way it has been marketed to you. Vision boards you glance at once a week, affirmations recited without feeling, hoping that repetition alone will trick the universe into compliance. The real work is far more intimate and far more profound. The real work is assumption. To assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled and to persist in that assumption until it hardens into fact. This is the entire secret hidden in plain sight throughout Scripture, throughout every mystical tradition, throughout the teachings of every awakened soul who ever tried to describe the mechanics of creation to a world still asleep in appearances. Consider this: assumption is not pretending. Assumption is not lying to yourself. It is choosing deliberately and courageously to occupy the consciousness of the one who already has what they desire, rather than the consciousness of the one who is still waiting, hoping, and lacking. When you assume you are already the person your desire implies, something remarkable begins to happen beneath the surface of your awareness. Your subconscious mind, which cannot tell the difference between a vividly imagined scene and an actual sensory experience, begins to accept this new identity as true. And once your subconscious accepts a state as true, it must by law begin expressing that truth outward into your circumstances. Not might, not could, if the timing is right, if the universe feels generous. Must. This is not mysticism detached from logic. This is law, as unbending and impartial as gravity, as consistent as the sun rising each morning, whether or not anyone is watching, you must realize that your subconscious mind does not argue with you about whether your desire is realistic. It does not consult your bank statement or your relationship history or your medical file before deciding what to create. It simply takes whatever you persistently feel to be true about yourself and weaves it into your experience with total, unwavering obedience. This is why so many people who consciously want more actually experience less. Because somewhere beneath their hopeful words, they are still assuming lack, still feeling unworthy, still rehearsing the story of disappointment from their past and calling it realism. The subconscious does not know the difference between a memory and an imagined future held with the same intensity of feeling. It simply responds to what is impressed upon it with conviction. This is why the state you dwell in matters infinitely more than the words you speak. You can say, "I am wealthy," while inwardly trembling with the fear of never having enough, and the fear will win, because feeling always outweighs language in the language of consciousness. You can say, "I am loved," while secretly convinced you are unworthy of love, and the conviction will always be the one that gets expressed into form. Understand this: you are always, in every moment, manifesting. There is no moment when the law is off duty. The only variable is whether you are manifesting consciously from a chosen and examined state, or unconsciously from an inherited and unexamined one. Let that sink into your spirit. So much of what you call your personality, your beliefs about what you deserve, your assumptions about how life treats people like you, was handed to you before you were even old enough to question it. A parent's anxious words about money became your quiet belief that money is hard to come by. A teacher's careless comment about your intelligence became a lifelong assumption of inadequacy. A heartbreak in your 20s became a permanent conviction that love always leaves. None of these were ever truths etched into the fabric of the universe. They were simply assumptions, absorbed and repeated until they felt like facts. And here is the astonishing, liberating truth. If an assumption was learned, it can be unlearned. If a belief was built through repetition and feeling, it can be dismantled through repetition and feeling of a new and truer kind. You are not sentenced to the conclusions of your childhood. You are free in this very moment to begin constructing a new self-concept, one thought, one feeling, one imagined scene at a time. This is why self-concept is the master key to every transformation you will ever experience. Your outer life in its entirety is simply the outer expression of your inner concept of who you are. If you believe yourself to be someone who is always overlooked, you will find yourself again and again overlooked, not because life is cruel, but because life is obedient. It can only mirror back to you the assumption you hold about yourself. If you believe yourself to be someone whose ideas matter, whose presence is valued, whose needs are met with grace, you will begin to notice doors opening that were closed to you before, not because the world suddenly changed its mind about you, but because you changed your mind about yourself, and the world, being a faithful mirror, had no choice but to follow. Feel this deeply. You are not asking the world for permission to be worthy of your desire. You are not waiting for someone else to validate you before you allow yourself to feel deserving. The moment you shift your self-concept internally, the external evidence must eventually rearrange itself to match, because outer conditions have never been the cause of anything. They have only ever been the effect. This is one of the most radical reversals a human being can ever make in their thinking, and it is also one of the most freeing. You stop asking, how do I change my circumstances so that I can finally feel at peace? And you start asking, how do I claim peace right now, in this moment, regardless of circumstance, so that peace itself can go to work rearranging my circumstances on my behalf? You are not your past. You are not the accumulation of every disappointment you have carried, every rejection you have swallowed, every year that passed without the breakthrough you prayed for. You are in your truest identity, an idea in the mind of the infinite. an individualized point of awareness through which the creative power of the universe is choosing in this lifetime to express itself. When you forget this, you shrink. You begin to believe the small story the world has told you about your limitations. But when you remember this, even briefly, even imperfectly, you begin to stand differently, you begin to speak differently, you begin to imagine differently. And every one of those small internal shifts begins slowly and then suddenly to reshape the entire trajectory of your life. Think about this for a moment. If you were to fall asleep tonight, not with your usual rehearsal of worry, not replaying the argument from earlier or the bill that's due, but instead with the quiet, settled feeling of your wish already fulfilled, something within you would begin to reorganize itself around that new impression. This is why the state just before sleep is spoken of in the deeper teachings of consciousness as one of the most sacred and potent moments available to you each day. In that drowsy, half-waking threshold, your critical, analytical faculty grows quiet, and your subconscious becomes remarkably receptive to whatever you choose to dwell upon. This is not a coincidence. This is a doorway offered to you every single night of your life, and most people walk right past it, distracted, scrolling, worrying, forgetting that they hold within their own imagination the power to plant a seed in fertile soil. Imagine for a moment lying down tonight, and instead of reviewing your day's disappointments, you construct a brief scene, small and natural, that implies your desire has already been fulfilled. Not a grand, elaborate fantasy, but something simple and sensory. The feeling of a hand you've longed to hold, the sound of a voice congratulating you on the achievement you've been working toward, the lightness in your chest that comes from knowing the debt is paid, the diagnosis is clear, the relationship is healed. You dwell there, not analyzing how it will happen, not worrying about logistics, simply feeling the reality of it as though it is already so. This is not wishful thinking. This is disciplined, deliberate creation using the very faculty that was given to you for exactly this purpose. Let this settle within you. The how is never your responsibility. This is where so many people exhaust themselves trying to figure out every logistical step between where they are now and where they want to be, as though the universe needed their strategic assistance to rearrange circumstances on their behalf. Your only responsibility is the state. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and persist in that assumption, and the infinite intelligence that governs the unfolding of all form will orchestrate the means, the timing, the people, the opportunities, often in ways your logical mind never would have predicted or planned. This is what is meant when it is written that His ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts higher than our thoughts. The infinite has resources, connections, and timing far beyond what your conscious reasoning mind could ever calculate. Your job is simply to hold the end, to live from the feeling of the fulfilled state, and to release your grip on the exact mechanism by which it must appear. You must realize that doubt is the great saboteur of this entire process, not because doubt itself is powerful, but because doubt is simply another assumption, and whatever assumption you dwell in with feeling becomes the one that manifests. Doubt says, I want this, but I don't believe it's really possible for me. And in that single sentence lies the entire tragedy of unfulfilled desire for so many sincere, well-meaning people. They want deeply, but they believe shallowly. They can picture the dream, but they cannot yet inhabit the identity of someone to whom the dream naturally belongs. This is why the inner work always precedes the outer evidence. You cannot wait for the external world to convince you before you allow yourself to believe. Believing must come first, must be sustained without visible proof, must be held as an act of pure inner conviction, precisely because it is this unwavering inner conviction that becomes the substance from which the outer proof is eventually formed. Consider this. Faith, in its truest and most powerful expression, is not blind hope that something good might happen if you're lucky. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Substance, not a wish, not a longing, a substance, something real and solid in the unseen realm, functioning as the actual scaffolding upon which your visible life is built. When you hold faith in your fulfilled desire, you are not engaging in fantasy. You are working with the actual architecture of creation, laying down brick by brick in the unseen the very structure that will eventually rise undeniable and visible in your seen world. This is why persistence matters so profoundly. Not persistence in effort, not persistence in striving and forcing and pushing against a world that seems to resist you, but persistence in state. To return again and again, gently and without frustration, to the assumption of your wish fulfilled, every time the world offers you evidence to the contrary. This is the true spiritual discipline, far more demanding than any physical regimen, because it asks you to remain faithful to an unseen truth, even while your senses report something entirely different. And yet this is precisely the test that every soul who has ever manifested something extraordinary has had to pass. The empty bank account does not deny the assumption of abundance. The unhealed body does not deny the assumption of wellness. The empty chair across the table does not deny the assumption of love fulfilled. You hold your ground, not through gritted teeth and desperate hope, but through the calm, settled knowing of someone who has already seen the outcome and is simply waiting for the world to catch up to what they already know to be true. Understand this, the world you see today is simply the harvest of seeds you planted long ago, sometimes years ago, sometimes decades ago, in a state of consciousness you may not even remember holding. This means the seeds you plant today, in this very moment, through the state you choose to occupy, are quietly determining a future harvest you have not yet met. This should not frighten you. This should awaken in you an extraordinary sense of possibility, because it means that no matter what your current circumstances look like, no matter how many years you may have spent unconsciously assuming lack, sickness, rejection, or struggle, you have in this present moment the entire creative power necessary to begin planting an entirely new harvest. The past does not have to write your future. Only your present state does that, and your present state is always, always within your power to choose. Feel this deeply, and this is the great mercy hidden within the law of consciousness. It does not punish you for years of unconscious creation. It simply faithfully, without judgment, begins responding the instant you begin, sincerely and persistently, to occupy a new state. There is no cosmic ledger keeping track of how long you've believed the old story, no punishment for years spent in fear or doubt. There is only the eternal present, endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly ready to reflect back to you whatever you choose right now to assume as true. This is grace, not as an abstract theological concept, but as the actual mechanics of a universe that responds to consciousness rather than to time served. Think about this for a moment. Every person you admire, every story of transformation that has ever moved you, every so-called miracle you have ever heard of, follows this exact same pattern, whether the person who experienced it understood the underlying law or not. Someone reached a breaking point, released their grip on the old identity, and whether through desperation or grace or sheer exhaustion with suffering, began to imagine and feel a new reality with such conviction that it eventually hardened into fact. This is not reserved for the spiritually elite, the gifted few, the fortunate ones born with some special access denied to everyone else. This capacity lives within every single human being because it is not a talent, it is your nature. It is the very mechanism by which you were designed to live before the noise of the world convinced you to doubt it. You are not asking to be given a power you do not already possess. You are being invited to remember a power you have simply forgotten how to use deliberately. This is why the process of awakening so often feels less like learning something new and more like remembering something ancient, something your soul already knew before the conditioning of family, culture, and disappointment layered over it with static and doubt. When you begin to practice living from the end, imagining the fulfilled state, feeling its reality, persisting in that feeling despite appearances, you are not adopting a foreign discipline. You are returning home to the way you were always meant to move through this world. Notice what happens when you begin, even in small ways, to test this in your own daily life. Choose something modest at first, not because the law responds differently to small or large desires, but because your own confidence often needs gentle evidence to grow before it can hold a larger conviction. Imagine a small, specific kindness arriving unexpectedly and feel the gratitude of receiving it as though it has already happened. Watch, over the coming days, how such things have a curious way of appearing, almost playfully, as if the universe itself delights in confirming to you that you are indeed the operant power in your own experience. This is not superstition. This is the law revealing itself gently in small increments so that your faith can grow strong enough to eventually hold the larger, more sacred desires of your heart, the healing, the reunion, the calling you were born to fulfill. Let that sink into your spirit. You were not created to live a small, reactive life, drifting from one circumstance to the next, hoping that fate might finally be kind to you. You were created in the image of the very creative power that spoke galaxies into being, and that power did not exhaust itself in the beginning. It lives within you now, patiently waiting for you to stop outsourcing your authority to appearances, statistics, other people's opinions, and inherited fears, and to instead reclaim your rightful place as the one who assumes, who imagines, who feels, and who therefore creates. Consider this: every excuse you have ever used to explain why your desire has not yet manifested has at its root been a disguised assumption of powerlessness.